WWE is soon heading to Perth, Australia for the Elimination Chamber event, one of many PLEs the company has taken international of late. In recent years they've done them in a lot of countries, and they're soon adding France and Germany to the list. Personally, I love these events, because when done right they have a special feel to them, like when Raw and SmackDown went to Japan and Italy back in the day. It creates special moments, like when Bad Bunny entered Backlash last year and the crowd sang along with Jambea. In the late 90s to early 2000s, WWE's international shows were very different. They were pretty much exclusive to that market. At that time, WWE would produce 2 pay-per-view events in England every year that were exclusively aired on Sky Sports in the UK. While these events were essentially televised house shows, and rarely did anything consequential happen, occasionally you'd see something actually interesting, like at Rebellion 2001, where the main event was Stone Cold Steve Austin vs The Rock. Earlier in 2002, WWE had a similarly local event to this on August 10th in Melbourne, Australia, where they would pack in over 56,000 fans into Colonial Stadium. For some context, that would be a higher attendance than the following year's WrestleMania 19 from Seattle, and 3 times higher than SummerSlam 2002, which took place in the same month. Before I get to the show itself, let's go back to where it began. The event was first announced by WWE in December 2001, where the company laid out all of its international tours for 2002, including 2 European tours and 1 that went through Japan, Singapore and Malaysia, as well as the date in Australia. Before this, WWE had only ever gone to Australia twice, touring in 1985 and again in '86. Back in those days, WWE would tour an A team and a B team, depending on the market they were running, and given that the Junkyard Dog was the main name advertised, you can tell which team was heading to Oz. If this '86 card that I found is anything to go by, the fans in Australia weren't exactly getting the A team on the second tour either. This image of a tour shirt that I found on a Facebook post gives a better idea of the wrestlers that were involved in the '86 tour. I also found an advertisement for the '87 tour that was cancelled for reasons I couldn't find. In the March 4th, 2002 Wrestling Observer, Dave Meltzer reported that WWE had at one point been planning to expand their pay-per-view schedule to 24 events a year, but were now stripping that back to 16. He noted that the first month to have 2 events was planned to be August, with one being SummerSlam and the other being the Melbourne show. In early April, Jim Ross in his Ross Report column referred to the event as a pay-per-view, so this must still have been the plan then. But this is never mentioned again in any future Observer issues, so I don't know why it wasn't a pay-per-view in the end. Ross also strongly suggested that it would be a SmackDown branded event, which was very important in 2002, as this was during the time of the first brand split, where the 2 products actually felt different from each other. Raw was often the edgy brand, where ill-advised angles would happen, while SmackDown often focused on its wrestling. That's a massive generalisation, but you get the point. On April 11th, WWE held a press conference in Melbourne, featuring Vince McMahon along with Mark Henry and Stacy Keibler to hype up the event. At this time there hadn't been any specific roster announcements, but Vince heavily implied that the biggest stars on the show would be The Rock, Triple H and Hulk Hogan. It was here that Vince announced that the show wouldn't be on pay-per-view, but he did say that it might be shown on television in Australia and later released on home video, which it was. To this day, I've never seen a concrete reason for why Global Warning was never on pay-per-view, but observers from later in the year have reports about WWE failing to secure broadcasting deals in Australia, so maybe they just couldn't find a provider in the country to carry it. I want to stress that's just a guess though. Everything seemed to go seamless right up until the week of the event, when the Aussie version of the August 5th Raw broadcast included Jim Ross informing them that Hulk Hogan would not be attending, despite him being part of the advertising for the event. This caused a lot of fans to be upset, even going to the point of wanting refunds. Remember, it was a different time, when Hogan had recently stolen WrestleMania 18 with The Rock. The reason JR gave is that Hogan had been injured by Brock Lesnar on SmackDown, who would replace him on the tour, but in reality, he'd been battling long-standing knee and back problems. He was even asked if he would go to Australia and not wrestle just to make an appearance, but Hogan declined, fearing how much pain the long flight would put him through. Of the 3 biggest stars that had been advertised, only The Rock was still good to go, as Triple H was nursing an elbow injury and he was unlikely to make it back in time. Despite this, the main event ended up being a bit of an anomaly, for a few reasons that I'll get into. Dave Meltzer noted that ringside seats had sold for $750 dues. They also held a fan fest for 8,000 attendees and a black tie charity event. During the home video release, we would see the highlights from both of these. Hulk Hogan would eventually make it to Australia in 2009 as the main attraction of the Hulkamania Let the Battle Begin tour. This consisted of 4 atrocious looking cards that were main evented each night by Hulk Hogan defeating Ric Flair, who was wrestling his first matches since his WrestleMania 24 retirement the year before. The shows were mostly filled with ex-WWE talents and also included the last matches of Umaga, who would sadly pass away a week after the tour. For many years, the only way to watch Global Warning was on VHS and DVD releases, until 2018, when a 2-hour version was added to the WWE Network. You can immediately tell it's a SmackDown branded show, as while Stephanie McMahon welcomes us to the show, all I could focus on was the same piped-in crowd pops you used to hear on SmackDown back in the day, back when it was taped on Tuesdays. If you heard an example of that there, that means I got it past the YouTube police. From a match standpoint, the show is bookended with Bloodline members, as the first match is Rikishi vs Rico in a Kiss My Ass match. It did make me laugh thinking about all the parents in the crowd who brought kids to the show and heard that for the first time. It likely won't shock you to hear that Rikishi won this fairly quickly, and post-match would dance with 2 of the most 2002 looking kids ever. That's not a diss, by the way, I was one too. Throughout the show, we see video packages of the wrestlers in Australia, starting with Jamie Noble and Nydia learning to surf. Some of these are really fun, with the best involving Kurt Angle, Christian and Lance Storm visiting the zoo, with Kurt acting like he was looking at aliens, especially when he saw a giraffe. Kurt Angle catching attention for looking bemused? No. It only dawned on me afterwards that it was slightly kayfabe breaking to see your American hero hanging out with Lance Storm and Christian, who were teaming as the Un-Americans at the time. To be fair though, Angle did berate them all the way through, even noting that he wanted to break their ankles. Speaking of kayfabe breaking, at one point Kurt calls Christian J, and that slipped through in the edit. Another highlight of the show is Edge vs Chris Jericho. As I mentioned earlier, in 2002, Edge was quite a long way from becoming the rated R superstar, but he was definitely impressing as a singles star. He would miss most of 2003 due to being sidelined with a neck injury, but before that he was part of the famous SmackDown 6, who were the ones to watch on the blue brand. Edge made his entrance with a camcorder and was filming the crowd, and this made me realise that this must have been the 3rd largest crowd that Edge had ever performed in at this point in his career, behind WrestleMania 17 and 18. One match that didn't make it onto any releases best I can tell is Reverend Devon teaming with Deacon Batista against Mark Henry and a very young in his career Randy Orton, who made his debut in April of 2002. Even though only the live crowd saw this match, it's interesting that one of his early WWE matches was in front of 50,000 people. Orton and Henry would even defeat Devon and his future Evolution teammate. I mentioned earlier that the main event was a bit of an anomaly, and that's because it was a match of many firsts. Fans who weren't aware of this card might have thought that Brock Lesnar's first shot at the WWE title and his first and only match with The Rock was at SummerSlam 2002. They might also think that his first match with Triple H came a decade later at SummerSlam 2012. All of these are incorrect, as The Rock would defend the undisputed WWE title in a triple threat match against Triple H and Brock Lesnar. Post-match, after The Rock had retained his title, Triple H and The Rock would eject Brock from the ring, and both would hit the People's Elbow on Paul Heyman to end the night. Again, speaking of kayfabe breaking, it's rather weird to see Triple H being a good guy, while at this time he was in a bitter and violent feud with Shawn Michaels. Once Triple H left, The Rock would thank the fans for attending, and end the night with his classic catchphrases. On August 17th, 2002, WWE Confidential would air highlights of their tour of Australia. Apart from B-roll shots of the wrestlers mid-travelling, there isn't really anything that wasn't on the network version of the event. For many fans, this might be the only footage they would ever see until the network uploads 16 years later. Ever since Global Warning, WWE has had at least one event in Australia every year until that ended in 2020, for reasons you might be able to work out. The upcoming PLE will be the first time back in Australia since their 2019 3-show tour. According to an article I found in the Australian Fox News from December 2017, it seems there were talks to bring back global warning, only this time at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. This event that they're referring to would eventually be known as Super Showdown, a show main evented by Triple H with Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker with Kane. This random sounding match was on the way to their much more infamous tag team match at Crown Jewel in the following month. I'm sorry for reminding you of that one again. Following Super Showdown, WWE announced an attendance of 70,000 fans, but this was disputed by the Wrestling Observer, which claimed a more accurate figure would be 62,000. Whichever number is correct, they still topple global warning. Optus Stadium in Perth, where Elimination Chamber is set to be held, has a capacity of between 60 and 70,000 depending on the event, so it'll be interesting to see how many fans are present, but also what that giant cage looks like inside a venue that big. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please consider commenting, liking or subscribing.